So today I'm going to be talking about the case study I'm working, and I decided to make emphasis more on my theoretical approach to the study of extractivism and extraction industries, because I think this is what can connect my interests and interest of my colleagues from Chile and from other countries. So yeah, so I'm going to be talking about historical material, but more paying attention to possible approaches, possible fruitful approaches to it. Oops, sorry, apparently. Okay. So just a global overview of surface mining and the problems connected to it. So surface mining, the biggest problem with surface mining probably is that it's the most aggressive land use, one of the most aggressive land use industries. So like unlike underground mines, surface mines occupy huge territory, and it leads to terrible social conflict with local population and with other land-using industries such as agriculture and forestry. And this is where I see lots of structural similarities all over the world. And for example, in Chuquicamata copper mine in Chile, for example, and Bachat coal mine in Russia, which are located thousands and thousands of kilometers apart from each other. But if we just take a bird view of those production facilities, we can already see that see lots of similarities just in the way in which technological procedures determine the way in which we interact with those industries. So this is a mine in Chile, and this is a mine in Kuzbass region that Alexander has already mentioned. And so Bachat coal mine is currently one of the largest coal mines in Russia, and it's one of the oldest ones. So I'm working on a history of this mine and coal industry in the Soviet Union. So what I'm suggesting in my presentation is a particular approach to study of surface mining and to social problems of this industry, and the ways in which we can work with the particular cases connected to surface mining. So what I'm suggesting to discuss today is the notion of social costs of production that was developed by William Kopp in, I think it was developed in 1970s. It's quite old theory, but I find it very interesting as an alternative to the notion of externalities. Externalities is the usual way of analysis of economic, how environmental problems are translated to economic terms. So what William Kopp is suggesting, to use the term social cost of production, and what he's arguing is that cost shifting to third parties and to society as a whole is the key way for manufacturers to secure high profits, and it's a universal feature. And it can take all sorts of forms. So, for example, if there is a big plant that produces lots of emissions like sulfur emissions, we can encounter growing public spending on healthcare in the region. So this is the one of a form of social costs. No one from the production facility doesn't cover those costs, but society as a whole spends lots of its own resources to support the production of this facility by spending more its resources on healthcare. Another example is land reclamation, which is very acute problem for surface mining, when we need to invest lots of resources into destructed lands to return them to like productive form. Social forms also take form of losses in related sectors. For example, when a surface mine takes land from agricultural producers, and agricultural producers suffer losses from that. And a more general problem is a destruction of natural capital belonging to the whole society. So, for example, one of the cases which is directly connected to me personally is that in a place where I'm from, there was a little river that was called a silver river, but then there was a coal treatment facility. I have no idea how it's called in English. Coal treatment facility was built, and local population renamed this little river into Black One, just because it was so polluted that they lost their silver river, and now this is just a black river. It is very difficult to calculate those social costs because we're talking about commons, right? So there is no price tag on the silver river, but when local population loses this element of its natural capital, it loses something. So I suggest talking about social costs of surface mining today. The idea of social cost, first and foremost, was developed as an alternative to the notion of externalities, as an attempt to develop a better quantitative analysis of nature management, and to calculate a real economic growth. So, as William Cobb wrote in his work, whether growth and development are worth their price can be determined only after an attempt is made to ascertain the total cost involved, total costs of production involved, including both private costs and social costs, right? So he's arguing that economic growth is not just investments, wages, buying technologies and machines. It is also the natural capital we lost. But I think that we can use this conception of social costs also to undertake a qualitative analysis of different cases of social problems around surface mining. Why is that? The theory of social costs distinguishes three main actors. So the first is producers as a source of social costs. Second, it is a society, the society in general that bears the social costs. So, for example, local population that lost this silver river that I mentioned earlier, and also, and also agents of redistribution. Different social agents that make attempts to redistribute those social costs between different agents. So in my own research, I'm trying to use this theory to analyze Soviet economic and political structure, and to understand how surface mining operated within the structure. And probably I should, excuse me, how much time do I have, Daniel? Is it?
You have 12 more minutes.
12 more minutes, wonderful. So I can go a little bit more in detail.
Yeah.
All right. So it's analyzing how this institutional arrangement, analyzing this institutional arrangement around surface mining in the Soviet Union allows us to understand like unique features of each particular society. And in my case, it is the analysis of the Soviet economic and political structure, right? So we see like structural technological similarities, but if we go deeper into analysis of how these different which particular organizations or groups of people occupy those positions, producers, society in general, and agents of redistribution, we can understand unique qualitative features of each society. So in the Soviet Union, there was a quite complicated political and economic structure. So I would start with state administration that with the Council of Ministries of the Soviet Union on its very top, Council of Ministries for each Union republic. So Soviet Union was comprised of several republics, like Russia. Russia was just one of the republics within the Soviet Union, and on a lower level we can see regional administration, and on the very bottom, municipal administration. But also there was a parallel structure of industrial management, which went a ministry on the all country level, on a lower level, a trust, like a big company that united production facilities in different regions, or in one region but many different facilities, and on the very bottom, an enterprise itself. Another parallel level was the structure of economic planning. So the Soviet Union was a planned economy, and the institute that was responsible for economic development was called the State Planning Committee, or Gosplan, and it had its own agents on every level of state administration and industrial management. So, for example, the Council of Ministry of the Union Republic had its own planning committee that had to provide calculations for how this region is going to develop within coming 5-year period, for example. But there was another layer of party administration. So it was a single party political system that was in which the main role played the Communist Party, right? So the Central Committee of the Communist Party was the place where actually all the most important political economic decisions were made. And again, party had its own cells in every single agency in the in industrial management and economic planning. It had their own party cells on every enterprise. And the usual explaining of the Soviet economic and political history is that those party cells actually made a decision, and the rest of the agency had to follow this decision. So explaining this quite complicated structure, I'm trying, and of course I'm skipping some elements. It is just like very general things to understand how those different structures interacted within the case of the expansion of the Bachat surface mine in the 1970s. So it was founded in 1949 as one of just a little pit that provided coal for local population. In the 1970s, the Ministry of Coal Industry invested a lot into these production facilities, and this coal mine became one of the largest coal producers in the USSR. Again, it was part of a global trend, and turn from labor-intensive underground mining to nature-intensive surface mining was the process that was visible in the United States, in Europe, in Latin America, and this global trend can be explained with the notion of social cost. I'm sorry, I misspelled here a little bit, because when your industry is labor intensive, it is very difficult to socialize your costs, because much of the cost of your production is basically what you have to pay to your workers, or what you have to pay for your machines, for example. In case of nature-intensive industries, you have much less personnel, but you have to enclosure huge amount of commons. Commons is not commons do not have a economic nature in themselves, and that allows producers to save their costs, to shift their costs to the society. And what exactly I'm studying here is the conflict over compensation for withdrawal of land from agricultural producers. And sorry. Little sip of tea. So the conflict over compensation was an interesting case of this interaction of different agents of the Soviet society, because what you can see on the left is what coal miners had to compensate to agricultural producers by law. So law determined that they had to compensate only what they destroyed. So they destroyed little animal farms and just 5 very little buildings and some other objects. There was also their fields, and they had to compensate for their fields, but I'm not talking about them right now because they are a little bit different story. But here we can see very clearly the difference between what coal miners had to pay to agricultural producers by law. But here on the right was what local administration tried to ask from coal miners as a compensation. So instead of just reconstruction of little animal farm for just a little bit less than 200 heads, they suggested that the coal miners had to make a real serious investment and build a livestock complex for 400 heads of cows and bulls, something like that. So analyzing this conflict allows to take a closer look at the Soviet economic and political structure. And so the first question is, who was considered a producer or a source of social costs? Because no Soviet enterprise was a private enterprise, right? So the Bachat mine I'm studying was just a part of a very vertical structure of the Ministry of Coal Industry. And in this particular conflict, the minister himself and his personnel was operated as the main agent, as a source of social costs. And first of all, they were key investing agent and the designer of the Sophros mine project, right? So the design of this new mine was made on the national level, and they were key negotiator with the local population, with the other institutes, and they directly borrowed the cost of compensation, because this compensation was part of the reconstruction of the mine itself. So the project included this compensation, and they had to adjust it to the to what local administration asked. But if we take a look at the lower level, what about the trust Kemerovo Uголь? Kemerovo Uголь was a trust that included all surface mines in the Kuzbass region. It had its own. It was partly independent. Let's say it that way. Kemerovo Uголь didn't participate directly in the negotiations, but what's interesting was that the land reclamation was arranged on the level of trust. What it meant on the practice. So, for example, the Bachat mine withdraw some lands from a local population, local farms, and the Kemerovo Uголь had to compensate the land that were withdrawn, and the fact that the land reclamation unit was not attached to the mine itself, but was connected to this trust, the trust was able to provide a better lands in a completely different area. So, for example, when they took mine from the Bachat place, so it was very close to the mine, they actually developed a new fields 200 kilometers from the place they took the field, just because the trust Kemerovo Uголь administered the entire surface mining in the big region of Kuzbass. So they didn't compensate the local population directly, but they compensated the region in general, right? So the fact that the economic structure allowed this this move is something very interesting about this system. But what about the mine itself? Nothing. It did not participate in the negotiations. Its leaders are invisible. Its director is invisible in the documents I have been working with. So it explains a lot about the economic structure of the Soviet Union and makes interesting intervention in the discussion of the history of enterprise of the Soviet Union, history of business. I'm not going into detail of this literature here, but this is something very important about this structure. So about the what about the next element of the social cost of production theory?
2 minutes, Roman.
2 minutes. I'm finishing. I'm already completing my presentation. So what about society in general? When we make when we say this, we assume something that we assume that it is everybody and everywhere, but it's also interesting element of this interaction between, because different agents conceptualize society in general in very different terms. So, for example, Gosplan, the head of the entire Soviet planning, made a step in this discussion around this compensation, and they argued for minimal compensation because they said this is what is prescribed by our law, and the coal miners should compensate only what they actually destroyed. And society in general for their national economy. Why would coal miners compensate for something that was not here on the land, right? So their logic was that the economy in general is something we need to care about, and that was the society in general for them. But for regional administration, they were the agent that try to argue for this maximum of compensation. And for them, the Bachat mine expansion was a source of investments in the region. And for them, it was something more than just an economic enterprise. It was a social good. Big investments in one particular industry was considered a social good for the society in general in this region. So society in general is the region for this regional administration. And the very last thing I wanted to mention is important missing agents. So we would expect to see, for example, agricultural industrial management. So the title of my presentation was Coal Mines Against Collective Farms, but there were no collective farms, right? They are completely absent in the story. They never step in the discussion. They never protect their interests directly. So we can just assume that they try to get as much compensation as possible, but probably they acted through the regional administration. Another interesting thing, we don't see local population. There were no institutes that could that would allow local population to raise its voice and to say whether they agree to leave their lands and to let coal miners develop it. Right? It's also a very important feature. And the Communist Party, the traditional understanding of the Soviet history is that this is the key agent in the entire economic and political structure. But it is absolutely invisible in this story, and it also helps us to question our simplified understanding of what was the Soviet authoritarianism, right? So it was of course authoritarian, and we can see local population. This is a clear sign of that, but it was very complicated constructed society, and in the cases of like I'm studying, it was absent. So I'm finishing here, and I hope it was interesting and enlightening in a way. Thank you so much. I will be happy to answer your questions.